Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Evgeny Schwartz's play, The Dragon. So before we talk about The Dragon, I need to show you this picture that should be up on screen now. Look at this mensch. This dude, he's a Jew. He's got a cat in his Wikipedia profile picture. This dude is all right in my book. Anyway, so The Dragon comes out in 1933 or 34. The sources seem to differ, right? So in this book, Classic Soviet Plays, the translator, I guess, Robert Daglish, or the editor of the collection, suggests it's 1943, but I've also seen online 1944. Anyway, it comes out toward the end of World War II, and it is an anti-Nazi fairy tale. Apparently Schwartz was big into fairy tales. This was a standard part of his literary and dramaturgical techniques. He was big into this, and that makes a lot of sense within a regime like the Soviet Union, like the Stalinist Soviet Union especially, which is a highly censorious and highly restrictive regime, because things like fairy tale, myth, adaptation, these allow for allegory. And I don't think Schwartz was necessarily anti-Soviet, but this is one way that artists within autocratic regimes traditionally get around censorship, is through allegory, through mythologizing, through sort of Brechtian style of setting a play in a different time and place so that it's not commentary on what's going on right now. It's fantasy, right? And Schwartz is doing that, but it's an anti-Nazi fantasy. So in this sense, it actually aligns with the Soviet regime, because by 43, 44, the Soviet Union was very much engaged in the war against Nazi Germany, right? So, and Schwartz is a Jew. So he has a personal vested interest in Hitler getting everything that was coming to him, right? So we have here a traditional fairy tale setup in which the wandering knight Lancelot, descended from the famous Arthurian knight Lancelot, and a distant relative of St. George, arrives in this town and learns, initially from a talking cat. As a cat person, very cool. The cat is a supporting hero of this story, along with the donkey, which I care less about, but cats are good. So Lancelot arrives and he learns that this town is controlled by a three-headed, four-legged, fire-breathing dragon who has reigned over this town for 400 years, and every year demands the sacrifice of a maiden. The townspeople have basically just sort of been like, okay, this is our life. Guess we're doing this. And it's been 200 years since anyone has challenged the dragon to a fight. The people who did challenge the dragon consistently lost. When the town sort of collectively had tried to rise up, the dragon just destroyed everything. But the dragon also provides some civil benefits, I guess. He creates a sense of order. He protects the town from other dragons. He has boiled a lake at one point to thwart a cholera outbreak. So the people are basically just like, okay, dragons here. It's not ideal, but it could be worse. And Lancelot shows up and he's like, well, I'm going to slay this dragon. because I'm just a wandering hero, and that is what I do, is I go around and I slay dragons, regardless of the fact that literally everybody in this town, except for a very tiny number of people, are telling me, please go away, do not slay the dragon, just let us live our lives. Lancelot says, I want to do it anyway. And the townspeople sort of try to thwart him. The dragon, obviously, is opposed to being slain by Lancelot, but he does agree to fight Lancelot. And the fight kind of comes down to control of the town, but also kind of comes down to control of Elsa, who's sort of the young, beloved character. And she is the one that the dragon has chosen this year to be sacrificed to him. She and her father, Charlemagne, who's not the famous Charlemagne, but is sort of a town archivist, they've sort of said, okay, well, dragon's gonna kill Elsa. That's the way the cookie crumbles. And so they're like, Lancelot, don't fight the dragon. Just go away. We don't need your help. And Lancelot's like, no, Elsa, I'm going to fight this dragon for you. I'm going to free this town, etc. So that's the sort of initial setup, right? And it's pretty clear, I think, that this is an allegory for Nazism, right? Because on the one hand, you have the dragon, who, oh, sorry, I just very suddenly got somewhat stuffy. So the way that the dragon describes his martial techniques, but also his governing philosophy, is essentially a sort of thinly veiled version of Nazism. So the military techniques are essentially the blitzkrieg, right? This was the famous Nazi tactic where they would strike extremely hard and fast with the Air Force and tanks, and they would basically overrun defenses in order to conquer large amounts of territory very quickly. So Lancelot is sort of gathering some information about this town and about the dragon. And he asks Charlemagne, forgive me, but may I just ask one more question? Hasn't anyone ever tried to fight it? And Charlemagne says, not for the last 200 years. Before that, there were many challengers, but he killed them all. The dragon is a brilliant strategist and great tactician. He attacks the enemy suddenly, pelts him with rocks, then dives straight at the horse's head and sprays it with fire, thus completely incapacitating the poor animal. Then he claws the rider to pieces. So in the end, people gave up trying to fight him. So, I mean, attacking the enemy suddenly, the blitzkrieg, pelting him with rocks, that sounds like tanks or airborne bombs, right? Dives straight at the horse's head and sprays it with fire. A common technique for attacking was sort of planes would swoop in, drop bombs, or fire at targets on the ground, whatever it was, right? And so you get that sort of destruction, right? This very, very rapid destruction as part of Nazi tactics. And that was one of the reasons they were so successful at conquering so many countries early in the war. And the idea basically was that eventually, if the Nazis took over enough countries, other countries would stop resisting, right? This is sort of the Mongol theory, right? The Khan, when he was, Genghis Khan, when he was conquering territory, one of the things that he would do would be he would completely destroy one city, and then he would send messengers or survivors to the next city and basically say, if you don't want to end up like this town, you will bow to the Mongols. And Hitler was trying essentially to do the same thing. So Lancelot says, hasn't the whole city ever risen up against this dragon? Charlemagne says they have. Lancelot says, and what happened? Charlemagne says, he burnt the whole district and drove half the people there mad with poisonous gas. He is a great warrior. Now, I don't know in 1943 or 44 how well known it was in the Soviet Union, how many Soviet audiences would know what was actually going on with the Holocaust, would know details of it, etc., etc. But of course, poison gas was a common tactic used in World War I. It was used in World War II. But today, of course, we think our primary association of poisonous gas in World War II is the Holocaust. And so I don't know if this is a reference to that, or if when this play was written, that was not really public knowledge enough that Schwartz would throw this in there as a sort of reference that viewers of the play were supposed to get. I don't know. So anyway, so they have a little bit more of a chat. This is where we get the information that the dragon had boiled a lake to stop the cholera outbreak. So again, and this sort of parallels the idea of like Hitler makes sure the trains run on time, right? This fascism is okay because there's some of our material needs that are sort of slightly met, right? But then the other sort of good deed that this dragon has done is he has rid the town of the Romani. They don't mostly use the term Romani, they mostly use a G term, and is regarded by many of the Romani as an ethnic slur. And Lancelot's basically like, the Romani are good people. Like, what's the problem? And Charlemagne is like, they're natural vagrants, it's in their blood, they're enemies of any state system. Otherwise, they would have long since settled down and not be wandering all about the world. Their songs lack courage and their ideas are destructive. They steal children, they break in everywhere. Now we are completely free of them, but 100 years ago, any brunette had to prove that he had no Romani blood. Lancelot says, who told you all this about the Romani? Charlemagne says, our dragon. So, I mean, this is an interesting one because on the one hand, the Romani were a major target of the Nazi regime, and many of the stereotypes that Charlemagne mentions here are traditionally associated with the Romani. But there are also stereotypes traditionally associated with Jews. And that idea of like anyone who had dark hair had to prove that they were not Romani. Having dark hair was seen by the Nazis as one telltale sign of having Jewish blood, right? Our origins go back to the Middle East, to the Levant, to what's now Israel and Palestine, and places like this. And so dark hair is a traditional feature of many Jewish people, right? And it was regarded as one of the many sort of pseudoscientific, eugenics-based signals of Jewishness. And so we have this, I think, sort of doing dual work. Because again, on the one hand, there is a sort of literal Nazi repression of the Romani, a literal genocide against Europe's Romani people. You also have stereotypes associated with Jews, and of course, Nazi mythology much more focused on anti-Semitism than anti-Romani sentiment. And so that discourse would be more publicly foregrounded, I think. But both obviously were targets of the Nazi genocidal regime. So, but the thing that I find really striking about this is that what Schwartz does, I think, is very interesting, because he doesn't just vest evil in the dragon. He vests evil in the people who allow the dragon's regime to function. And so this is an interesting thing, right? Because people in my country right now, the United States, we have a semi-autocratic or hopeful autocratic ruler in Donald Trump. And many, many, many people are hoping for Trump's death. And my concern is that when Trump dies, the ideology and the prejudices and the divisions, the inability of working class people to identify their own economic and material interests, etc., that will not die with Trump. And this is the thing, right, is Hitler was the driving force of Nazism. The cult of personality congealed around him. But you can have Nazism without Hitler being alive. And this is, I think, the thing that Schwartz is really concerned about, right? Because at one point, the dragon, in attempting to sort of talk Lancelot out of this fight and just to leave this town and let the dragon carry on, he says, my people are really terrified. He's trying to sort of persuade Lancelot that these people aren't worth saving. He says, my people are really terrifying. You wouldn't find the like of them anywhere. I know, because it's my work. They are my creation. Lancelot says, but still they are people. And the dragon says, outwardly, yes. Lancelot says, no. The dragon says, if you could see their souls, how you would shake with fear. And Lancelot says, no. The dragon says, you'd run away. You wouldn't want to die for the sake of a lot of cripples. I know, my dear fellow, because it was I who crippled them, and I did the job properly. Human souls have great power of survival. You cut a man's body in half and he dies, but if you tear his soul, he merely becomes more obedient. No, you won't find souls like these anywhere, only in my city. Armless souls, legless souls, deaf and dead and dumb souls, chained up souls, tracker souls, accursed souls. Do you know why the burgomaster pretends to be mentally deranged? To hide the fact that he hasn't got a soul at all. Souls full of holes, souls for sale, case-hardened souls, dead souls. Yes, it's a pity they're invisible. Lancelot says, it's a bit of luck for you. Dragon says, why? Lancelot says, people would be horrified if they could see what has become of their souls. They would fight to the death and refuse to be a subjugated people. And who would feed you then? So I think this is really the interesting and striking thing in Schwartz's play, is that it's not just Hitler is bad, we kill Hitler and it ends, right? It's not a chess game where you take the king and the game is over. It's a battle for hearts and minds, as I think it was John F. Kennedy was the first one to sort of publicly use that phrase, right? This idea of people are drawn into the hatreds, the visceral evil that is something like Nazism or bigotry of any kind, right? And it corrupts the soul, it mutates the soul. One becomes a creature of hatred. And Lancelot believes in the redeemability of the soul. And the dragon doesn't. But the dragon loses the fight. But Lancelot is gravely wounded. And in Act 3, the dragon is dead. Or a year later, after this fight, Lancelot has gone off. No one knows what has become of him. And the burgomaster is now in charge of the town. Now, the burgomaster in the first two acts is the dragon's reluctant / loyal servant. He seems to be primarily driven by a survival instinct, a desire to live without the dragon punishing him in any way. And his son Heinrich is the dragon's basically personal secretary. So the burgomaster and Heinrich have essentially taken over the town, and they have imposed a police state comparable to that of the dragon, but without mythical powers, right? Now it's a chief of police, dungeons, torturers, etc., etc., and a a coerced ideology that it was in fact not Lancelot, but the burgomaster who slew the dragon. And so the burgomaster is the savior of the town and entitled to do whatever it is that he feels is in the town's best interest. And so the small number of people who actually have aided Lancelot in his fight with the dragon, they have all been imprisoned. Elsa is now going to be married against her will to the burgomaster. But it is clear that the majority of the people in this town remain subservient. Their souls remain twisted, crippled, devastated, just a new master has arrived, right? And so at the end of the play, Lancelot returns. He basically says to the burgomaster, your reign of terror is over. This time I realize I must stay because there is a lot of work to be done to heal these damaged souls, and I need to stay and do it because I cannot trust you all. I cannot trust the inhabitants of this town to heal themselves. And so that's quite interesting, right? If we think about the Nazis as the dragon, who's Lancelot? But the Soviets, right? The Soviet Union to come in, to smash the dragon, to liberate the people of the dragon. But then communism must come to Germany. Soviet ideology must come to Germany in order to heal the souls of the German people, which have been corrupted and twisted by Nazism and its bigoted, violent ideology.